5 times Sonic caught himself before calling them Mom and Dad, and one time he didn't hold back. Chapter 3. "3:05 p.m. Maddie tapped the steering wheel mindlessly, eyes on the front doors of Green Hills Middle School. She heard the bell ring. It shouldn't be long now. The windows were rolled down, letting in air that was unseasonably warm for Montana in October. Depending on his mood, maybe she'd suggest going for a run. It was Thursday, which meant Tom was working the late shift, so it'd be just the two of them. With the days getting shorter and a cold snap in the forecast for the weekend, getting out and enjoying the afternoon seemed like a good idea. But again, that would all depend on his mood. School was starting to feel like a crapshoot. Some afternoons, he bounded down the stone steps, bursting at the seams to tell her about absolutely everything from the cafeteria menu to the trophy case he'd saved from a wayward football. Or other days. The doors swung open and her face fell. Looked like today was going to be another other day. He was never hard to spot, a blue alien hedgehog amongst a crowd of human teenagers. But on better days, sometimes he'd try to surprise her, zipping past the crowd and appearing in the back seat of the SUV before she'd even started to open the door. Today, he walked. Walking was never a good sign. He only walked when he had to, or when he wasn't in the mood to run. She put a smile and pressed the button on the center console that opened the back door.
Hey, kiddo.
Hey.
He stood on the curb, glowering at the back passenger seat, the booster. She knew he hated it. She'd been the one he'd come running to when Tom had brought them home. One for her car and one for his. He pleaded, begged, lamented animatedly about the great injustice and indignity of it. He was invulnerable. He shouldn't have to follow rules meant for human children. He hadn't liked it at all when she pointed out that he wasn't invincible, and that maybe Tom had a point. He stormed up to his room, hollowing that they were the absolute worst before pulling the ladder up with such force that it rattled the light fixtures. They had exchanged smiles and comments like, "You feel like a parent yet?" and consoled themselves with the fact that they were doing the best and that he would come around. And he did come around, sort of, later that night after skipping dinner.
Did we finish last season of Man in the High Castle?
Tom asked, remote in hand. Beside him on the couch, Maddie tucked her feet up on the cushions.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. Did we want to start next?
A rush of air and a blue blur in his peripheral vision stopped him mid-sentence, and they both turned. From the kitchen, they could hear the fridge being pulled open. He moved to stand, but she put a hand on his arm. A moment later, the blur zipped past them, again. Tom craned his neck and Maddie squeezed his arm.
Maybe he's not ready to.
She started, but then the blue blur reappeared, solidifying in the doorway as a sullen-looking teenager.
What are you guys watching?
He asked, eyes on the TV instead of on them.
Hadn't decided yet. Any requests?
Tom patted the spawn next to him on the couch. The boy didn't move, or at least not forward. He fidgeted in place, muttering to himself, with himself, before saying quietly,
I think Netflix was supposed to have a new Pokemon movie or something.
Maddie leaned forward, smiled when she managed to catch his eye.
That sounds good to me.
He slowly shuffled into the living room, moving around the coffee table to climb up on Maddie's side of the couch. As she shifted, letting him snuggle up against her, she caught Tom's poorly hidden frown out of the corner of her eye. A little pang of pain twinged in her chest. She brushed her fingers against his leg as on the other side of her, Sonic was pushing his head into her hand, signaling what he wanted. She obliged, rubbing his ears and taking the opportunity to speak up when Tom queued up the movie.
When I tried to ruin your life, you know.
Sonic's muzzle flushed pink, but he didn't pull away.
Yeah, I know.
They didn't speak much more during the movie, only occasionally when something on screen didn't make sense and the teen had to explain it, which truthfully left the adults even more confused. And that was where they left this particular subject. Him not liking it but putting up with it anyway. He heaved his backpack in first and stepped in after it, pulling the door shut before climbing up and buckling himself in. Then he propped his elbow on the armrest and let his chin fall into his hand.
All set, Pretzel Lady.
She started the engine and made her way out of the parking lot.
How was school?
Fine.
She'd been a teenager ages ago, it seemed. She knew what fine meant. Fine meant no amount of fresh air was going to make this boy smile today. They wound their way through town in silence, or at least near silence. Halfway home, she could hear him whispering to himself. It was a habit, one born of years spent alone, no one but himself to talk to. When he'd first moved in, it had been a bit jarring. They'd kept responding to questions not meant for them, and she'd noticed he'd taken to lowering his volume when he did it. He couldn't stop, not yet anyway, but he was making an effort to be less obvious about it. So she tried to ignore it. Most of the time. Alone in the car though, it was hard. The word stupid hissed like venom, caught her attention as they pulled into the driveway and she frowned.
How stupid.
His head snapped up like he had forgotten where he was, and he scowled.
I wasn't talking to you.
Snapped, in a blur of motion, he was out of the car, up the side of the house, and into his room through the skylight. Maddie put the car into park, sighing, as she reached over to grab her purse from the passenger seat. She spotted his backpack, still on the floor behind her. She pulled it into the front seat by one strap, and noticed the front pocket was only half closed. There was a white envelope sticking out, which, on closer inspection, was to Mr. and Mrs. Wachowski.
Oh no.
She tore it open and unfolded the single sheet of paper inside, scanning it quickly as realization dawned, and her face fell. The knock on the door was entirely expected, but Sonic still cringed. Lying on his stomach on his bed, he spoke into his pillow.
Go away.
The stairs creaked, and the floorboards echoed, and Maddie's voice replied.
Yeah, that's not gonna happen.
He couldn't look at her. He knew she'd found it. She had to have found it. Why else would she have come up here? Usually when he needed time to cool off about something, they gave him his space. But if she'd found it, if she knew. His eyes burned as he pressed his face further into the pillow, hoping against hope that she'd just give up and leave him alone.
Sonic?
He groaned, raised his head up just enough so he could glare bleary-eyed at the headboard.
You wanna know who's stupid, Daddy? Me.
His voice cracked as he said it, just add insult to injury.
I don't want to hear you say that again.
Why not?
The words were like acid in his mouth.
You got the proof right there in your hand.
She came up beside the bed.
Can I say it?
You sure you want to? Some of the stupid might move off.
She sat down.
I said knock it off with that.
She held out the piece of paper and he flinched away from it.
All I've got here is a letter. That's sad.
He sprang up, snatched it away from her.
Remedial math, Maddie. They want to put me in remedial math. That's code for stew.
Hey,
It was her turn to snap, and it took him by enough surprise that he fell back on his tail on the bed.
say that word one more time and so help me.
She stopped, closed her eyes, and started to breathe, long and deep. He sat, waiting, wet eyes wide and heart pounding. He'd never seen her mad before, not like this. What was she even mad about? He thought she would have been mad about him being, well, you know, a failure. But that didn't seem to be it. When she opened her eyes again, the fire had gone out, but he still found he couldn't relax.
I'm sorry.
What for?
His fist clenched around the letter.
You're not the one who...
Before he could finish his sentence, she was gathering him up in her arms, pulling him in tight. Stunned, He didn't even think to try pulling away, arms limp at his sides. The letter still tight in one hand. His face was pressed against her sweater, and scent, lavender soap, and mountain air surrounded him. He could feel her heartbeat against his cheek, her breath on his ears, and then something soft and warm pressed against the top of his head, and it took him a minute to figure out what she was doing. Kissing him, over and over, she kissed him between the ears, a sensation so new and foreign and wonderful, and he didn't deserve it. The world went blurry around the edges, and he let the crumpled paper fall to the bed, lifting shaky hands up to clutch at her shirt. He opened his mouth, but only a whimper came out, so he clamped it shut again. One of her hands went to his quills, stroking gently, and the mouth still so close to his fur, whispered,
It's okay, baby. It's okay.
His heart lurched so forcefully he thought it might come up his throat. He should have been mad. He kinda wanted to be. He wasn't a baby, but then again here he was, falling in her arms. So maybe he was. What was it about her that made it so easy to cry? He never used to. After the first few days on Earth, he made a promised effort to not. 10 years of hard work building up the walls, and all this woman had to do was hug him and kiss him. Something no one had ever done before, ever. And it all came tumbling down. He really was a baby. Her baby. The thought was so startling, he actually gasped. It came out more like a shaky, hiccuping sob, and she tightened her grip, kissing him again. Man, that felt nice. The swirling cyclone of horrible things he'd been thinking about himself all day suddenly collided with this new perplexing information, and his stomach did a flip inside of him. He was her baby, which meant she was his.
Nah,
He choked out, hiding his face in her now soaked sweater.
nah.
The word caught in his throat.
Hey, you're okay. Her soothing voice washed over him. But was he? He wrapped his arms around her as tightly as he could.
I'm sorry.
Don't you dare be sorry. There's no reason for it.
Then she was shifting them both, pulling him into her lap, and he let her, content to be cradled while he worked to get his breathing back in sync with hers. With a sniff, he wiped out his nose with the back of one of his gloves, not knowing what to say next. She saved him the trouble, asking quietly,
Who taught you how to eat?
Huh?
Who taught you how to eat?
Nobody. I hung outside the elementary school windows a lot.
He gestured vaguely in the direction of the little can TV set they'd brought home up from his cave.
Sesame Street helped.
You taught yourself to read and write?
I guess.
Does that sound like somebody who's stupid to you?
He blinked at his shoes.
Well, no, I guess not. But the letter.
The letter says your teacher thinks you could use some extra help, because you probably could.
She resumed stroking his quills.
Sonic, you've only been in school for a month. Every other kid has been doing it for 8 years. And I'm going to guess that you won't be alone in that new math class, because not everyone is great at everything.
He snorted.
I used to be.
Her hand found his cheek, tilted his face up towards her.
You are absolutely amazing, but no one is perfect. So please don't try to be.
That's okay?
More than okay.
She leaned down just enough to plant a kiss on his nose, and even as he blushed and squirmed and groaned, his heart swelled.
Feeling better enough to be embarrassed now, Zoo.
He failed to fight a smile and nodded.
Thanks. Mom. Maddie. Coward.
Anytime, kiddo.
She gave him another squeeze, and he let her in no hurry to be out of her lap.
So, I'm gonna take a wild guess that homework isn't what you want to be doing right now.
He made a face and she laughed.
How about we get some fresh air? Ozzy needs a walk, and I think we forgot about your after-school snack. I've got guac in the fridge.
Snack and then walk?
You got it.
He slipped his arms around her neck. This hugging thing was really the bee's knees, and squeezed before hopping back to the floor.
I'm actually kind of looking forward to my English homework.
He said as he moved towards the stairs.
Yeah?
She followed after him, smiling.
Yeah, We just started reading The Outsiders.
Oh, that's a classic. You know they made a movie of it, right?
They did?
When you finish the book, we could find it to watch.
Awesome!
With a spring in his step, he led her back downstairs. In the back of his brain, the word mom tumbled around. One more big word to mull over later. For now, though, there was walk.